Okay, we're live or we're recording. Um, Welcome everyone to the latest edition of the Scholar Gypsies. I'm delighted today to have Thomas Sheridan join me for a chat. We're going to be talking about the hate speech legislation that's scheduled to go through before Christmas. I'm not quite sure if it has been postponed till after Christmas, but it was scheduled to go down for a vote before Christmas. Um, the reason I want to get Thomas on is because Thomas has probably the largest platform in Ireland in the alternative space between his Substack writing and his range of YouTube channels, which most of my readers and viewers would be familiar with. So welcome, Thomas. And I just wanted to start today with I suppose we're going into a insidious era where we're now seeing the creation of a new type of crime, a hate crime. And I just wanted to get your thoughts, your feelings and thoughts on this development in Ireland and how it might pertain to, you know, content providers like yourself and myself, and maybe even smaller ones that might be thinking of publishing online or even just publishing on social media channels. I just wanted to get your overall take on what's going on at the moment.
Well, Jerry, it's good to see you again. Yes, I've been thinking long and hard about this, and I've been trying to be as standoffish as possible about it, not jumping into the deep end, when I say the way that it's portrayed to the extreme. At the same time, too, you cannot deny what they've written up in the draft with your own eyes. It's remarkably, authoritarian. And the reason why it bothers me so much is because I'm still an old-fashioned liberal. I've never not stopped being an old-fashioned liberal. I have the liberal values that I grew up with, lived all my life with up until now, and I haven't changed. And I can remember a time when you had the right to offend somebody, and then they had the right to take you to court or something like that in a civil action, or for you to look like a fool in public. Now, we've fallen so far that I can remember back in the day, the band Living Colour were talking about the Guns N' Roses song "One in a Million," where Axl Rose mentions the N word, and one of the guys from Living Colour, all black guys, went up and said to him on a tour, "Well, what was this about?" And he explained to him that at the time I was an uneducated, ignorant kid, and that's how I felt. And the guys from Living Colour said, "Yeah, fair enough. That's okay. We accept that." Their attitude was that it was, it, you have the right to say basically what you want in terms of an artistic expression. And I'm going to cover this a lot in this thing, because one aspect of this that hasn't been spoken about is how this will affect the arts in this country. And not just going forward, but past, present, and future. And this is why I'm shocked that no artists have come forward and say, "Hold on a second, where does this stand in terms of free expression?" And that's quite worrying that we've reached that stage. But I can remember, like, in the guys from A Living Colour said, he's the right to be an asshole, and we have the right to call him back an asshole. And that was the late 80s, early 90s. And I can remember there was a thing in America about the band Two Live Crew, and they had this, like, really what was called, like, offensive, sexist album that they had, where they were calling women bitches and stuff like this, and talking about, like, gang banging them and stuff like that. And I can remember the American actor Eric Bogosian getting up on the MTV Awards and saying, the First Amendment says they have the right to say what they like. You don't have to like it, and they can be held accountable according to what they say. You know, publish and be damned kind of thing. And so that's the world I grew up in. That's the world I grew up in. That someone was an asshole and behaved in an inappropriate, an offensive way to someone. They were either called out, or it was particularly bad, they could be taken to civil court and done in a lawsuit or something like that. And that's the way I think it. That's the only way I will accept this particular paradigm. I won't accept it any other way.
Mhm.
I I don't like the left. I don't like the right. Even though my mentality is liberal, I'm an anarchist. I truly believe that the purpose of government is just purely administrative and has no right to impose a philosophical mandate upon the people. And that's what we're dealing with here: an authoritarian philosophical mandate that's not rooted in common sense, correct jurisprudence. It's not rooted in a conventional dialogue. I mean, you take something like, we don't have politicians to sit down and have proper debates anymore. You take something like when the founding of the United States was founded, you have the Federalist papers and the Continental Congress in Philadelphia having intense, deep debates of what was the nature of the U.S. Republic in terms of the right to have free expression and stuff like that. Well, we have politicians in this country that would not be capable of any level of intellectual discourse. So they merely sign up to globalist fads. And this is what's quite worrying, is that they are approaching us with all of us, not just people who think differently or something outside them. I mean, every Irish person, regardless, even though you on the left are not safe, remember that. Eventually, they will always come. They'll come looking for you as well. It's a fad, and it's an ideological fad. And the fact that they could implement such probably the most draconian law in the history of the state, it actually makes Section 27 during the IRA years look tame by comparison. And every single person that values freedom in this country and values expression, and especially people who value expression in things beyond the political discourse in terms of like freedom of expression and the arts, should be deeply concerned about this. I would say Ireland probably has the most draconian anti-free speech law in the West if this thing goes through in the manner they wanted to go through. And that is an appalling indictment and damning of this so-called regime that we have in charge.
Yeah, I would, I would go along with almost all of that. One of the surprises to me is, like you've raised there, the arts, but again, another industry that should be up in arms about this in a functioning country would be the media,
Yep. Yep.
because you would have thought. Um, Now, I would say it ties back to your concept of this being an ideology, and it just so happens that our media and our politics and our, in uh, NGO sector and others are consumed by the same ideology. You do get I get a sense anyway that the mouthpieces for this law, like Helen McEntee, it's almost when I see her on television, it's like, has she taken three Xanax before she's got on telly? Because there's no emotion there. It's almost like somebody mouthing words that she doesn't comprehend the potential damage that is coming through on what she's doing. Um,
Well, what haven't we heard the expression before? Just following orders. She's
hmm,
not capable of internal self-reference. That's quite apparent, even by the most casual, cursory observation of her over the course of like a few news conferences. That aspect of her personality simply doesn't exist, and therefore she's the perfect vehicle for controlling this. There is no sense of an agonizing. Well, I'm gone now.
no, you're okay.
Okay, there's no sense of some agonizing internal conflict. I mean, if I was in that position, I would be very much, tormented. Like, what am I doing here? Am I doing the right thing? Uh, am I a tyrant? Am I going against the founding fathers of this republic? Am I going against the concept of European liberalism and Western tolerance? There's none of this. They don't have any understanding of this. She would have no more understanding of, the political discourses that created the West, from Plato's Republic through Marcus Aurelius, through Edmund Burke, through everybody to today. She'd be driven. We saw what they're like with Varadkar when he was in town Downing Street. He was mentioning films like Love Actually, and when he was in the government, he was sending letters to Kylie Minogue on government paper. So she would be probably someone that would think, once Friends was still on the air, and once the new Friends series is it coming out, that that's an all you need in life. And this is terrifying to think that people like this are actually holding public office and actually legislating such laws to this degree when they have no internal depth of understanding of, it's not like the days of Conor Cruz O'Brien
Hmm.
or, Sean McBride. These people would have the intellectual capacity to analyze these laws and stuff like that. It's purely like, oh, let's just get the far right. So, and we pass this law so I can get back to watching Friends. That's literally what's running this country right now.
I'm with you there, because it kind of it leads into what my next question was, really, is, the obscenity of all this is, we have this piece of legislation, and we have two things. That one, you've raised them there, but the idea that you could pass these laws without defining hate,
Mm.
and it ties back into, very recently they weren't able to define far right, and when they did, it was again a bit like this legislation. It could be anybody that is critical of the government, could be labeled as such, as far right. um like the how do you feel about, like, this idea that, every I think her response to being asked about why it wasn't defined is, everybody is basically understands what hate means, as if.
But the irony is that's kind of true, right? Hate is something that has very specific parameters, right? If there's a family of a different race or religion or skin color down the road, and I go down there, right, and I verbally abuse them, uh, terrorize the children, call them all kinds of names that are racist, that's hate, okay? That's hate. End of. However, we now have that, so it is simple, but they don't want it simple. So, for instance, here's an example of consequences of this law. Suppose, and I know most Muslims are disgusted by child brides. I know that, but the fact is, it still goes on. So you're a doctor in a hospital or a nurse in a hospital, and on the night of her wedding, an 8-year-old Islamic bride dies from internal bleeding of her sexual organs because she wasn't ready for her husband. Would the doctor reporting what happened to that child constitute hate speech? I want to know that. I want to know, because will he say, we'll just let it go because I don't want to be pulled before the courts and get a 5-year prison sentence?
Well,
She just
you'd imagine, like, in the first instance, he should be going to jail in this country for rape.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying. Will she? Will he?
Yeah.
Will the violation of that child be respected? And that's the issue I have. I want to know, where is hate hate is not a big a spectrum like they want to believe. Everything they believe in terms of what hate is completely arbitrary, right? So, for instance, if someone told a joke 20 years ago and mentioned the N-word, right? That's
Hmm.
hate, right? And there was no malice in it. He could have even told it to his black friend, right? And his black
Hmm.
friend laughed. That's hate, right? That's that, but it's not hate. Like, if that's hate, then have you ever seen Roddy Doyle's first edition of the Commitments book?
No, I haven't seen it.
Literally, every page has the N word.
Okay.
Every page. He's Mr. Woke now, Mr. Diversity. But under this oncoming law, there's nothing to stop anyone from saying, Roddy Doyle, back in 1991 or whatever, you wrote a book called The Commitments. On every page, there was the N word, and you made references to, black males' penises and this kind of thing. Aren't you a racist? I want to see the parameters that they're setting kind of make it many ways impossible to prosecute. And I'll
Hmm.
tell you why. It reminds me so much of the 2009 blasphemy law that no one was actually done under. Now, that's what makes me think we have to not be too nervous about this law, because it's more like a threat than an actual agenda. It's almost like, look, we know from the last 3 years that most Irish males are pathological cowards. You know, that's a fact, right? It's like, oh Jesus, oh Jesus. Pardon me. And so the powers that be in this country, the establishment, know very well that 90% of, no, 80% of Irish men are sniveling cowards, right? They love to like talk that talk and not that walk. But when it comes down to push comes to shove, they showed what cowards they were between 2020 and 2022, right? So that's now they know how they know the system. All they need now is like, oh Jesus, Larry, don't do that. You know, you'll end up 5 years in prison. So it's almost like a a threat more than anything else. Because I
Are
think
a
if they
re are a reason are a reason to legitimize that behavior, if you know what I mean. It's almost like here's a reason to continue that behavior.
exactly normalizing it, right? Now, if they were to prosecute someone in this country for that, other than a real piece of shit who was a true bigot and racist, I'm talking about someone who might like write a blog post about like concerns about deportations or immigration numbers and stuff like that. That person would be internationally risen on the global stage to a Steve Biko or a Solzhenitsyn or
Hmm.
a Julian Assange. You'd have people like Tucker Carlson saying, "Can you believe this guy's been arrested in Ireland for day?" And this is the insurance policy we still have for freedom of speech in this country. Is the Elon Musk's? No matter what you think about them, they have, the- you know, the Irish establishment are just as pathetic as the Irish culture today. That are terrified of what the neighbours might say about them. And the neighbours in this case are the Elon Musk, the Tucker Carlsons, the Joe Rogans, blah, and so on and so on and so on. And so I think they got they got the shit frightened out of them when Elon Musk showed up in this debate because they thought it was all going to be nice and cozy and taken care of here in Ireland, and no one would hear. Obviously the GAA mentality, their little GAA politics, and suddenly they're on the global stage going, "What the fuck?" Why are these people interested? And in many ways, they're kind of saving us, these outsiders. And it's like one of the saving graces that we have. But again, if they were actually to prosecute someone who wasn't like now, again, this is a hand on my heart, right? I've never met anyone in Ireland who's a vicious racist. Not one.
No.
Um, but I saw a vicious racist once. You know who it was recently?
Who?
Boyd Barrett at a pro-Palestinian calling literally for a second Holocaust. So when he did that, if there was ever anyone prosecuted in court for hate crime, all you have to do is pull that video up of Boyd Barrett talking about wiping the Israelis off the face of the earth, calling for a second Holocaust, and then there's your defense. You know,
Hmm.
is he allowed to get away with this? That was absolutely disgraceful, absolutely shocking behavior.
Absolutely, but the thing is, and I was talking to a senior counsel about this late last week, and you know, there's two things with this law. This law seems to be is it's so you're in the realms of speculation all the time as to how it could be utilized or how they will implement it, and then you're also left with like the people that are protected, we'll say the protected characteristics, like are so generic. It's like I'll list them out here: race, color, nationality, religion, national or ethnic origin, descent. So basically, if somebody in your family three generations ago was a certain something or other, gender obviously, and that includes transgender, sex characteristics like your orientation, or and then disability, and even if you have an absence of a religious, so even the atheists are included there as well, so in case nobody's left out. So like my thing with that is literally every single person in the country falls into one, two, or three of those categories. So
Oh yeah,
in
yeah.
in terms of the implementation is like if I suddenly decide to take the hump, we have a heated discussion and we use a variety of different language in our arguments back and forth, we could, like, what would stop us and say, look, he did the race thing there, he did the religious thing there as well. And that, do you know what I'm saying, is that it's almost self-censorship seems to be the goal here, is that
Yeah,
people
but
will just second
it's
guess themselves.
shut up, exactly. To shut them, to self-regulate themselves. That's really what they want, and they know that they saw them during the pandemic. There was, they saw, people calling their neighbors saying, "I think she has something in her shopping that's not essential." This happened. These things happened. And
Mhm.
if you look at the whole pandemic thing, 99% of it was self-regulation and
Oh,
also regulation of their citizens. So they're using the same thing. So that's why I think like anything coming to the courts is highly unlikely. Except one thing I'm actually going to try and work towards. There are Israelis living in this country who are actually fearing for their lives directly because of Boyd Barrett's speech. And if this law was passed, the first thing I would do is have those Israelis go after Boyd Barrett for hate speech. And that would be just a beautiful irony of the whole thing. That would just you could draw. It was covered in the paper. Israelis in Ireland are scared because of all this stuff, and he is the primary one of it. So these people themselves, when he's not like wanting to take homes off the kulaks and distribute them into the housing stock, this Bolshevik was attacking in the most vicious form of anti-Semitism. We should never let this go. He gave us a gold. He gave us the fucking uh, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory golden ticket when he had a psychiatric episode at that pro-Palestinian meeting and asked for the extermination and demanded the extermination of Israelis. I will never let that go. And if that hate speech law comes in, I'll make sure that every Israeli I know, and I know a few here, will go after him for it, because he should not be allowed away with that. And especially, so it's the irony is the ones who want it the most are the biggest violators. Like,
mhm,
what I'm saying? That's the madness of it. This is what these people have no sense of self. They have
mhm.
no sense self-awareness, no self thing. Like, for instance, that riot we had in Parnell Square riot a few weeks ago, right? I did not hear anyone make a racial comment in the crowd. All the scangers that were there, all the couriers and everything that were going there, I didn't hear one. I didn't hear one thing, not one. So, but yet you can go to any people before profit meeting and you will hear the most brutal anti-Semitism you could hear anywhere. And these are the people who want the laws put in.
Well, and these are also the people. There's a few things you brought up there. These are also the people that use the most vicious language about elements of Irish society. People like us, and that Aidan or Reardon, the Labour guy, did it as well. In his, there was a back and forth with the rural independents, and it was a kind of, he called them the lowest denominator of the lowest denominator, and it,
Yeah,
and
what
it
do you call it? The Hillary Clinton deplorables thing.
Yeah, yeah. So it was, but it was a beautiful insight into exactly what they think of us, as these kind of almost subhuman element to this ideology that just has to be kind of, it managed, but like sometimes the language is like exterminated, is the way they
Oh,
they look at
oh,
us.
absolutely. I mean, I see. I look at some of these people, and they wouldn't be far off a KGB killing room or an NVKD killing room in Budapest in 1949. You know, uh, I mean, I've seen members of left wing parties being cordially approached by people who would be on the right in a respectful manner, and they call them toe rags and scum and filth. It's like that song that Stephen Sutton released, "The Only Hate Is on Your Side." That's absolutely 100% true. On this side, it's like we range from like, and again, I'm not on the right. I'm very much an
Mhm,
anarchist, but I want to know what's going on, and I want to live in a free and open society, and that for everybody, not just that. But it's like my attitude is like, what gives? What gi- I mean, all the hate is on their side, and it's vicious. It's
mhm,
vicious, to the
mhm,
point where Boyd Barrett calls for, a second Auschwitz, kind of literally, practically. And these people are the ones who, this I'm flabbergasted by. Again, a lot of it has to do with the Irish electorate not being very intelligent and voting in idiots. I mean, it's like Christian Morris beautifully summarized. It was like that Helen McEntee rode her father's coffin like a canoe into the Dol. That's not harsh. That's absolutely the truth. And I believe the Coveneys ended up in government for the same reason too. The father was fell off a mountain or something. I mean, these I'll show you a poor thing. Yeah, if this is how we vote for people in this country, this is the kind of people we're going to get.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Like, and especially in the McEntee thing is, there was definitely like there's definitely, I don't know, some trauma with that, with the death of her father. It seems to me, like, it's just my opinion, and it's whatever effect that has had, whatever shadow that has, it seems to have come through forcefully in the politics that she's pursuing for the last, number of years.
Well, I want to bring up something else, and I'm not specifically talking about her. I'm generalizing here, right? Do you remember during the whole COVID stuff, the NEFID meetings, how there
Mm.
was almost at times an element of sadism? Like it was almost like we'd like to let you have your Christmas, but no, smirk and smile. There was an almost a BDSM sadism, and I'm starting to wonder how many of these people in government. I'm not naming names. uh, This authoritarianism represents some kind of sexual fetish for them. I really want to know that because that behavior and that pathology was evidently manifested during the NEFIT meetings at certain occasions. Again, not naming anyone in particular, but you'll know who they
Well,
are.
well, we had the case. We had the strange case just before the restrictions were lifted. Leo Varadkar gave an interview to, I think it was the Independent, where he more or less said, like, the future would be, we were in a new reality and we would have to manage pockets of freedom for the people, but that, the government or the authoritarian state would be taking that freedom as it saw fit, based on, you know, contrived global events, like, we'll say, COVID, and, or, we're seeing it now with Ukraine, Israeli Palestine, the climate stuff. Um, that and yet, and then we had like, within a week, every restriction was lifted, and but I definitely get the sense that there is a cohort in that government that got really, something got switched on with them when they got all, with that power. And I don't
Mm.
know if, in terms of what you're talking about there, but I could see it in the ordinary person on the street. Like, I'll never forget the some person, and it was like maybe 25% of the population. I kind of always thought it was, where, when the mask mandate came in, and it didn't come in straight away, the mask mandate, people don't remember that, but in the beginning, there was no mask mandate for a while. But then when it came in, I was walking down the street, and somebody just started roaring at me for not wearing a mask on the street, and then he caught himself and says, "Oh, he'd forgotten that the regulation was in a public place." But I could see it was like, boom, and, that was a size that there's a sizable part of the population that switch was turned on, and I don't know if it was ever turned off.
Yeah, I think so because I mean, our mutual buddy John Waters spoke about so many of the politicians in this country, and for a long time now, probably gone back decades, were the kind of like nebbishes or nerds that didn't have schlubs, that didn't have friends in school, or they didn't weren't part of the cool gang. They didn't run with the punks or the goths or the metalheads. They were sort of like in among the crowd who are being primed to be civil servants or whatever. And so when they do get into government, it's almost like that, the stereotype that the cop a lot of people who become policemen were actually bullied in school and now it's payback. I almost think now they have social payback. It's now time to take away the freedoms you had that I never had when I was a teenager. As you people do carry their neuroses and psychologies through them all their lives. And especially if these people, that's not to get too deep into the whole Jungian
Mhm.
psychology, but they have not integrated their shadows in many cases. They have not, this is a huge problem with these people. And I think with Helen McEntee, I'm not psychoanalyzing her, but you brought a valid point in. Has she not integrated the shadow of her father's death, and instead is rather reaching out in a kind of a reactive way this way? I think if these people are in public office, they're definitely there to be psychoanalyzed as well as once we don't, be deliberately malicious. But I do wonder if she has not integrated the shadow regarding this. And I often see that in Varadkar. Like when
Or, yeah.
you know, I can remember years ago, and this is no, I'm not meaning to be homophobic, but like to me, someone like Christian Morris is a gay man, right? That's a fucking homo, right? That's a gayer, right? Right? And unashamedly so, and that's what we want. That's the kind of people we want them to be. I do anyway. Varadkar almost seems like someone who is still quite insecure about it or something. I don't know.
It's he seems very conflicted by it,
Yeah,
is what I'd say, because he was so late coming out. Because he spent most of his early doll period. It was a question. His sexuality was a question mark that was never addressed by himself or anybody, or the
and
media,
he's
and
and he
that's fair
shouldn't.
enough.
Yeah, it's his own business. Yeah,
Yeah, it's his own business. But when he did address it publicly himself, I've always got the sense he's still he's either conflicted talking about it. It's like an uncomfortable suit of clothes that anytime he goes into the area, like when you're talking to, like, I've interviewed Christian, and he's very, do you know what I mean? He's very there's no doubt that do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. He's like when I lived in New York. He's like the proper queers. They were that's what they are. And and there's a great you have a great respect for that because
Mm,
there's so much they're safe in their own skin. You
mhm,
know, it's like there's nothing. There's one of the things I find most attractive. I don't mean in that way, but I mean likable and attractive in a person is when they're true to themselves. I
mhm.
find that a a
Well,
a, a wonderful character trait.
I think you might have hit on it there, because I think we're talking about two individuals who are, and I suppose that's shadow work too, is who find it difficult to be to establish the truth to themselves. And I'm not talking just sexual, orientation or grief, but that they're not actually addressing what the truths of themselves are. And just on the psychology of it, if we're just opinionating here on the two of them, but what you might say is we have 35,000 NGOs who are certainly psychoanalyzing our government to get what they want out of them.
That's a very powerful point that you brought up. Then that their transference of this lack of integration of the self in terms of integrating the shadow in their own personalities being projected to society as a whole. Now look at you and me, how we're talking about this. We're saying, okay, if there is issues there, well, we kind of feel bad for them.
Mhm,
Hopefully they'll sort it out. Now you look at the other side. Everyone is a Nazi.
mhm,
Everyone is a right wing asshole. Everyone is a bigot. There's no sense to actually say, are these grannies in Fermoy or in Ballymun or in Finglas or in anywhere? Do they have a legitimate concern? No, you have politicians actually saying, "Why would I meet with these scum? You
mhm,
know, why would I meet with them?" And here's me and you who are supposed to be like representing everything that's wrong with this country, actually trying to figure out and understand and mediate and find like common ground where we could probably say, well, if that's what's wrong there and they can fix it, that's great. The other side is purely reactive, purely reactionary, and purely aggressive. And then they have and everything is spurned by reactive. They're all like Rick from the Young Ones. Everyone's a Nazi, everyone's a bigot, everyone's a homophobe, but no one is allowed to say that. They'll never stop for a minute and say, does that granny with who's lost, or this old lady, say in Ballyfermot or anywhere, right? And all her neighbours are gone, and she's on her own. And older people tend to be nervous disposition anyway, because
Mhm.
and they've all moved away for dying, and she's surrounded by people who can't speak English on either side of her. And she says, I don't, and all she might merely say is, I don't know who my neighbors are and I don't feel comfortable. And immediately they come down on her with a ton of bricks, calling her a neo-Nazi. You know, there's a complete lack of compassion on the so-called left-wing side, which I find, and if you look through history, you read the work of Solzhenitsyn and, you know, Havel and everyone. And there's a phenomenal book called The Psychotic Left, and it talks about how, that's literally, there's an arse hair between that and taking people to an basement and shooting them. You know, that kind of a thing.
Yeah,
For
yeah, yeah.
enemies of the state, the
Mm,
Chinese Cultural Revolution, and these people in this country and that do have this mentality, they're already psychologically at the level of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And again, you like there was a guy I read a book about. He was a Jungian. He's one of Carl Jung's students, Belgian guy, and he was a prisoner, a Dutch guy, sorry, and he was held in a Japanese camp in World War II. And he said that at certain times you might like most of the month you might have a perfectly agreeable relationship with the Japanese guards. Like they wouldn't bother you. You know, they'd feed you, they'd give you water, they wouldn't bother you. But he said at certain times they would weaponize and they would beat the prisoners, the Dutch and the Allied prisoners mercilessly. And he goes, he always remembers the look in their eyes. They weren't in there. And I see that with so much the left in this country. They're
yeah.
not in there. They have the
Mm.
same vacancy in their eyes, and that eventually seems to distort their facial features and everything. And you know, and
Well, you
again,
can see, and you can see why. Then, well, you can see. Just to, sorry to cut in on you there, but you triggered something in my head there. That's why labeling is so important to these people because it allows them not to have to think or feel deeply about the consequences of what they're proposing to do to you, because
and it
they can just
also
go boom.
they can dehumanize you. You're not a person who had like a parent who might have had multiple sclerosis you took care of, or you might have lost had a child who died of cancer. No, you maybe not a person with all these life experiences. No, no, no. You're simply far right. You're
Mm,
simply a Nazi. You know, and this to me, if I this shows me a person who's really not a completed human being and certainly shouldn't be legislating laws on the moral parameters of society when they haven't even worked out the moral parameters of themselves.
yeah, and what I would say, like, there's another element that has been kind of I to this, um, and that's the AI tech element in terms of, um, you said they're not almost human. I'd almost, I'd say they're already have made half the leap to transhumanism. Some of these people, in terms of the way they're controllable, in the way their mindsets are controllable. So, you know, you brought up a number of names, Sean McBride and Connor Cruiser Bryan. There'd have been like the likes of John Waters on, questions and answers, if this was happening 20 years ago, as the voice of the left, probably, of why this is a bad thing, and why we shouldn't be doing this, because you'd be standing for freedom of thought, freedom of speech, all this stuff. um so I would be I'd love to get your opinion on that element of, we'll say, the kind of the tech AI element of where we might be going, or where some of these people might not be able to come back from.
Well, didn't Elon Musk say himself that Twitter Dublin was literally a propaganda outfit for the Irish government? And there
Mm,
were literally Irish politicians could literally make phone calls to Twitter headquarters to have people deleted and so on, including some quite shocking accusations regarding, even low-level politicians in this country. So, yes, absolutely. I mean, when you start thinking in binary code and everything is according to protocols and script, you know, that's how reality then develops. This is this is, you have someone who's like in their early 40s, lives in an apartment and collects like those big headed bubble toys, has no family, no children, no nothing, and is still basically an adolescent who's been allowed to remain an adolescent because of their tech job. And then these are the ones, again, setting the ethical parameters of society. I mean, we have all the wrong people doing it. We have no, these people's their consciousness has been fermented in the world of like bits, sound bites, protocols, script, and this is transferred into their daily behavior. You can have. I mean, I got out of working in business when this was taking over. When this was taking over in the early 2000s, and I saw even in then the early fermented stages of it. That one company I worked with, 9/11 happened, and 160 of their employees were killed in the first attack. And after a day, the biggest issue in the company with management was we have the servers back up and running and we're back in business. Not 160 members of staff were killed. It was already creeping in at that point that human resources were beginning to mean that literally human resources. And this ties in again with the whole thing of like calling someone a name. You've automatically dehumanized them. You don't have to meet them. You don't have to look them in the eye because it's easy to do that and actually like think about things. And so that's the world they're raised in. And you're seeing it's a superficiality really when you think about it. And this superficiality is right across the Irish political spectrum, especially in parties like Fine Gael, which tend to have a kind of an upper middle class, you know, demographic among them. And you see that very much within them, that there's this kind of like, all you need is a few sound bites and you're a politician. All you need is the right words. And, you know, if there is hope in that stuff, is that I hope there's a few old, it's probably too late now, but old time Fianna Fáilers who are, I do know people who lifelong Fianna Fáilers going right back to the War of Independence and the Civil War, who are actually disgusted by the coalition with Fine Gael. They're absolutely sickened by it. And there's on the ground, there's a lot of anger about that. And I find that like most of the ideological stuff that's happening around this tends to be Fianna Gaelers and the Greens. Have you noticed that? The Fianna Fáilers, other than Martin, who's like I don't know what his, I don't know. I mean, he strikes me as the kind of guy that will go along to get along, kind of thing. Once he still has his job, he reminds me of that guy in an office who would who would put up with anything once he still had his little middle management position. That's what he strikes me. But it seems to me if there is hope, it lies with the rural and even urban old fashioned Fianna Fáilers who might still have that Civil War kind of like aspect still in them. And if we were to defeat this, that's actually one of the ways we could exploit this, is to actually say, does Fianna Fáil really want to go down as the party who implemented the hate speech laws because of like the likes of Radgar and McEntee, who were not even your own party? So that's a way that's a kink in the armor that can be exploited, and I have no doubt that behind the scenes, at some level, that's going on.
Well, we've seen it quite literally at the weekend. With the Roscahill Hotel burning down, and Noel Thomas, actually, who's a Fianna Fáil county councillor, came out, and a couple of others gave interviews, basically not condoning whoever burned it down, but like saying, well, we understand how this is happening. It's like, well, if you keep walking towards a cliff, somebody's going to fall over it, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? And he was I interviewed him maybe 6 months ago during the summer when something erupted in Galway on the mass immigration. And he was like you were saying, he's very much like, by the end of the conversation, I was like, this fella's more awake than I am. Like, he knew exactly what was going on. He knew why it was going on. And so I do think they're out there. They've been very quite like, they'd want to gather themselves pretty quickly. And the other thing I'd only say is, one of the things we need to frame is that Dublin, I think there's a certain surprise with the elite element that live in Dublin City, because this metamorphosis has already happened in Dublin, even pre-COVID. Dublin's like a different country to rural Ireland, we'll say, especially west of Ireland. And I think there's a certain element of shock to, these protests. Even that thing in Roscahill is significant because it ties into the superficiality of what you're saying is the government are saying, oh, don't, we can't do this, we can't do this. But at the same time, they've no depth of feeling as to what they're going to do to stop it if it happens again. I think it's the third fire, it's the third place that has burnt down in the last 2 weeks. So, I, I don't know what the future holds there. So I'd be quite hopeful that this might come, and the mass immigration stuff could come to a halt quite quickly.
While Dublin absolutely, I've got both feet, a foot in both worlds, from my
Yeah.
life. While Dublin absolutely is a different culture country than Ireland, it's not really part of Ireland. I don't think it ever really was. The metropolitan elites that you're talking about in the Greater Dublin area, the majority of them would be living in places in South County Dublin and that kind of thing. They would be what you're talking about, but you would find that people from like the Ballymun, the
Oh
Fingnesses,
yeah. Yeah.
they would be very similar to people in Tuam or working class neighborhoods of Galway City or Limerick and stuff like that. And they know firsthand what these types are like because they have to like live with them, and they've seen like discriminatory. I mean, I grew up in the Ballymun Flats, right? And that was deliberately that was a beautiful place when that was first built in terms of like the idea behind it. But the attitude was after a while, is a screw them. They don't deserve it, the kind of a thing, and let it just die, And that was the attitude. It was like, we're giving your little housing estate now. We don't care anymore. Go, it falls apart. That's your problem. This kind of thing. So, and remember, I wasn't surprised that when it did kick off, and we still don't know what really happened in Parnell Square. It's still all very peculiar.
Yeah.
But I can tell you for a fact, Jerry, that there was a look in the eyes of many of those young lads that were there, and granted, many of them were gurriers, and scangers up for the crack, that kind of a thing, right? But there was a look in their eyes that I can tell you for a fact rattled the absolute shite out of the metropolitan elites, because they thought that was completely gone. They thought that was all over. And if you look at like 1916, they were the ones who were formed like the squad of Collins and people like that. Vinnie Bourne and people like that were scangers from like the inner city. That's who they were, And one of the things about a scanger is that kind of scanger, just like you had like farm boys and farm labourers in the West Cork during the flying columns, is those people can become active and clever very, very quickly because they have an element of street smarts or cop on they'd have in like the west of Ireland that they don't have in the metropolitan elite. And what happened that night, I can honestly tell you, no matter what the story was behind it, that genuinely disturbed them. Varadkar's speech the next day was rooted in fear. Like a school teacher who knew he's lost control of the school and was trying to make your mothers and your sisters are ashamed of yourselves, and this kind of thing. But that was like, I think they thought that was snuffed out and gone. I think they thought that was, they were judging all of Ireland by the children of the metropolitan elites who work in IT or are going to UCD or TCD, and had forgotten that that's not Ireland. Ireland is a different place than what their little woke world that we live, the little woke bubble they live in. And I think that was a huge wake up call to them. I think that really shocked them.
Well, there's a little bit of tying into, you says, like the nerd, like the nerd takeover. I'm not saying these people are all nerds, but if you take that analogy, it's like to find out, if the nerd is running the school, but then to find out, oh, actually, the school still has a few hard cases walking the corridors. That kind of knocks your confidence about yourself immediately. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, it's there's a great power in that too. There's a great power in knowing, someone like Charlie Haughey could go up to places like Ballymun and Finglas and could meet them one on one.
And
And then,
famously did, yeah.
yeah, and he would like meet the scangers and say, like, what the fuck are you on about? And like, or I would say, no, I understand, don't worry about it. And then that night meet someone like Francois Mitterrand or someone like that. We did this is how far we've fallen. Someone like Charlie Haughey, if he was still around, like he would be laughing at all this and throwing them out. He'd be throwing them out of the window of his office in
Well, there
Leinster
was
House.
the way I describe it is I can understand the corruption of that era, the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, but one thing you would have said about all of, Pádraig Flynn, Charlie, Ray Burke, all of them, Bertie even, you can understand their corruption, but you always felt that they were rooted in Ireland, these people, and the
Yeah,
interests
it's
were,
weird, isn't it?
it was like they had the, you might say they had the decency to get cash for whatever they did. This crowd are not even taking the brown envelope. They're just captured by the ideology.
Yeah,
Is
and
and
if there is a brown envelope, it's a job in the
yeah,
United Nations, the
yeah.
EU, and they're
Mm,
basically furnishing their resumes right now with these things like these hate speech laws. But you're right, you know, I'd rather be with someone who was a cuter, than I would be with someone who is an ideologue any day of the week.
mm.
Think of
The
yourself
attitudes, yeah.
if you were in a plane and it crashed on a desert, you found yourself on a desert island. Who would you want to be with? A bunch of cute whores or a bunch of people, ideologues? You'd go with the cute whores, wouldn't you? And again,
Right.
our education system has an awful lot to do with this as well. An awful lot to do with it. Traditionally, the Irish education system produce two things: civil servants and immigrants, and still doing that. It's right now it's Australians it's producing, but that's producing generally what it produced. A token number of like you know working class guys would end up at Anco or Foss and stuff like that, and they become like the servants, and that's another huge element of this thing as well. Is that have you ever noticed how the wokies revert to, well, who will wash our dishes and sweep our floors? They almost see these immigrants as help, as servants. And this is the metropolitan elite mentality coming out. This is the wealthy Fine Gael farmer, landowner mentality coming out, where they have servants and help and labourers around the estate. And this is you see that coming out, and there even the journalists even
Oh, I
mentioning
say. I think it was Rosie Ningle had or somebody like that in the Times had that, made that kind of a general point. But it's again not accurate because, like it again, I think John Waters made a good point. Is we should never have got into this cycle of having this underclass coming in to do jobs that we do not, that are below us, and are the concept that there are jobs below us as a people, like going back to the 90s. But the thing is, many many of the people coming in here are going directly into our health service. They're doctors. They're not, an underclass. They're going into our tech sector, and so we're getting. I would say we're getting hit both at the top and at the bottom. And it's laughable when I hear these people kind of refer to it in the terms that you're saying. Is it's it's not as described.
But anecdotally, I don't know how you see it, but anecdotally, when I travel around the country, the majority of people who work in service jobs are still Irish people, predominantly young women. Like if you go in the cafes and restaurants, it's nearly always young Irish women who work in them, in the delis and stuff. I don't know how it maybe in Galway it's different than up
My
here.
my my, my experience is that the retail sector, um, in Galway, any place I've been in Galway is the opposite. It's almost predominantly foreign. Anyone is what I'd see now. That's just anecdotally.
Yeah, I
Um,
would say that at the retail section is like a lot of Polish and Lithuanians,
and
and
yeah,
up to them. They're like hardworking people and
but
stuff like that.
yeah, but like they're not like from when I'm anytime it's a delicate subject talking about this, but like I'm not talking about when I'm talking about immigration. Really, I'm whenever I do, it's not about that. We have free movement of people within the European Union, so I it's never been about that. The the reveal though is our government are targeting people outside of the EU to come and fill these jobs now, and
And I
they're
can't understand why. Can you figure out a reason for that?
it's a slave class because and like it's uh, these people will put up with work conditions and accommodation that others would not. So like you know, if you go to, if you go to any European country now, country now, and they move to here, they would expect a certain level of pay and, you know, um, living standards. Whereas if you come from maybe a Brazilian favela, or you come from sub-Saharan Africa, and what you're willing to put up with on both fronts might be a hell of a lot more. And that's just an example to me of who are the real racists here. The government know exactly what they're doing when they're targeting for these people to come into our country. It is essentially to abuse them.
Oh yeah,
Whether
well, yeah, and I mean that's always what immigration has traditionally been about: finding someone to undercut the present generation of workers, and that would include in this country the Polish and Lithuanians, and those that are here. They're undermining them as well, and it's true they are the real racists. They show it when they make comments like "Who will wash our floors and who will clean our dishes."
yeah,
They
it
show
tells
it all
exactly.
the time. They show it all the time when they classify, when they, Boyd Barrett, bring back him, makes that comments about Israelis. That was racism 101, and bigotry and religious prejudice 101. And so, yeah, it's just like the hypocrisy is what bothers me. And, as we close up, this is one of the reasons I think they're going to have tremendous trouble actually implementing this law. And I really do these laws, and I wouldn't be surprised after 10 years, like the blasphemy law that was struck off the statute books, because eh, bad law is undefinable law. That's the way I've always seen it, right? Bad undefinable law is necessarily bad law. It doesn't make good court cases. It doesn't make good prosecutions, and it doesn't have a sort of a longevity within the sort of like the domain of natural law. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. So, although we should be very negative about what they're doing to us and the pathology behind it, let's not assume the absolute worst until it happens, because there's a difference between a ruse and an actual event. And I'm seeing more of a ruse at the moment.
Well, the only thing I would be worried about here, to be honest, I'm not really worried about, you know, anything in particular about having to alter the way I talk or speak or publish. But one element I am worried, we're not worried about, but it's a heinous sliver of this law, is the introduction of thought crime, where you haven't published something, or you're possessing material, and a member of the Garda Síochána can apply for search warrants to go into your house, and whoever's in your house at the time the search warrant is applied also falls under the search warrant, and all of their digital devices. And if it's a subsection of, I think, section 15 is that one of the penalties is up to 12 months in jail if you fail to provide a passcode to the material on any of these, digital devices, or whatever might be on your property when they come to search it. So that to me is, and this is speculation, that to me is prone to serious abuse in terms of an authoritarian security force and our government trying to get, you know, it's like, if you got access to anybody's mind, you'd put everybody in the country would go to jail for a while. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? This kind of a way.
Again, yes, it's an abomination. Absolutely, 100%. But until it's actually implemented in terms of actual prosecutions, I'm not overly concerned about it, to be honest with you, because I do think the actual thing is self-policing. I think they got enough data on the Irish, and remember the Irish establishment, and particularly those metropolitan elites that you talk about. They see the Irish people as a subspecies, an actual, they don't even see us in an anthropological sense. They see us in almost like a zoology sense. They're studying a different species, and they got tremendous data from the COVID thing, and they're just going to run with that model of the. I mean, at the end of the day, how many people were actually prosecuted under the COVID stuff? Not a lot. A lot of, and quite a few were struck off. And I think the same will happen with this. they will have people terrified, like the lads down the pub, and go, "Oh, I got a joke for you about." And I go, "No, don't say no." And that kind of a thing, or
Well, we
like
all, yeah, yeah.
I was looking at my music collection the other day, right? You know, there's so many albums that I have that could actually be taken fall under the hate speech thing, like Easter
Mm.
by Patti Smith, this kind of, Susie and the Banshees, Arabian Nights, Killing an Arab by The Cure. It just goes on and on. And my DVD is Smokey and the Bandit. Like that's Blazing Saddles.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it's like where they're setting parameters on something that can't really be parameterized. That's the way I see it. And I do think I do believe that ultimately they know that a sizable amount of the population will police themselves out of terror, just like it does with a TV license, just like it does with lots of other things, and they'll be happy once they get that.
Hmm. That's great, Thomas. We're just hitting up in the hour there. We might wrap it up. You might just before you go, Thomas, because I'm always not the greatest at doing this. Just tell everyone your various channels and your various methods of communicating to the people.
The Substack channel, you get to everything from there.
All right. So Thomas, that's thomassheridan.substack.com. I'll have the links and all of that in the description for everyone. Anyway, and thanks a million, Thomas. Great talking to you as always. The hour flew by. And I'll just end the recording there.